So water everywhere. This is a common picture we see in Charleston, especially on high tides. This is at Lockwood and Wentworth Street. How many of you have driven through that before? Try to avoid that if you don't want to have your car damaged by salt water. We're seeing an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. That's directly linked to the increasing temperature. Increasing CO2 increases temperature. We've actually gone beyond 400 parts per million now, so we're on this trajectory to go above 2 degrees centigrade. That's directly related to how much sea level rise we will see. NOAA operates tide gauges around the country. We can see by all these different arrows going up that sea level trends are increasing. In some places in Louisiana by as much as 3 feet in the last 100 years. Here in Charleston we've seen a hot spot, but also in the mid-Atlantic. As you go farther north, sea level is actually going down, but that's because the land is rising from the lack of weight of the glaciers. What's going to happen in the future is how much, it's going to be completely related to how much CO2 we put into the atmosphere. The tall curve there is if we keep business as usual and keep going at the rate we're going to go, we're going to surpass the 2 degree, we're going to go to 4 degree, we're going to go to 6 degree centigrade. That's going to cause sea level to go up much faster. But if we stay in the Paris Agreement and we start to reduce the emissions globally, we may start to plateau and we will not see as much. But we are on a trajectory to see at least some sea level rise no matter what. So we put all this together, we can look at historical proxies. Before we had gauges, we looked at sediment cores. We had gauge data since the late 1800s. Since 1993, we started using satellites to measure the surface of the ocean. Now we're trying to project how much in the future. The biggest source of uncertainty for that right now is what are the ice sheets going to do. You see this graphic, of course this is Greenland. You see the graphic on the right. Most of the sea level rise we've seen so far has been from expansion of the ocean due to warming. If you put a cup, fill it up with water and put it into the microwave and turn on the microwave and heat the cup up, it spills over. Water expands when you make it warmer. That's what's happening now. So the ocean is absorbing the heat and is getting warmer and starting to expand. In the future, we believe that the ice sheets are going to start melting and they may be non-linear. We're going to get to a point where the ice sheets are going to go really quickly. Greenland's going to go first and the Arctic, because the Arctic is warming, the northern hemisphere is warming faster. How fast these ice sheets go is going to determine how fast sea level will go up. How much have we seen so far? Using satellite altimetry, you can see that right about now we're kind of on the middle. We're kind of in the median projection based on the high and the lows. You can kind of see where we're tracking. Here in Charleston, to kind of bring it home, again, we've talked about, we had a water level gauge here in the early 1900s. It got moved, but since 1921, going out to now, we've seen about 1.06 feet in the last 100 years. Now, 67% of that is global sea level rise, but 33% is actually from the land sinking too. So the combination of the two is what's adding to our sea level. So if you think about Hurricane Matthew happening in 1920, we would have had 1 foot less water coming into the city. Where are we going in the future? Some of the new projections are coming out now and they keep getting updated. But starting in 2000, you can see we have a lot of different curves, but the higher probability is where I have the arrows here. So you're looking between 2 to 6 feet depending. But as you see, the curves go like this in the future. It's because of the uncertainty. So what do we plan for? How do we know? You know the curves are a little bit closer together, but depending on what you're building, your infrastructure, if you want it to last that long, you may have to start including higher amounts of sea level rise into your planning. That means building buildings higher and starting to look at making buildings be at least 2.5 feet for critical facilities and 1.5 feet. So start to manage the system knowing that this is coming in the future. And we know it is coming because we can look at the data. Going back to the 1920s, we can see the number of flood events tracked by the National Weather Service, and number of times we've gone over these flood thresholds has been increasing. And by 2040, we could see 180 days. So the areas that currently flood now will become unusable. And this is going to make storms worse, because if you look in the floodplain now in 2010 and you go into the future, 2050, 2100, we're just going to see an increase in every single storm event we have is going to become worse. That's why people like in Hurricane Sandy thought, wow, this was a lot worse than it was back when I remember in the 50s, because we're seeing higher water levels every time we have a flood event. So what in the world are we going to do? There are steps to do this, to follow in any type of situation like this. The first thing you got to do is identify the problem. And that has to do with a lot of the work we do, which is do some mapping, determine what the vulnerabilities are, put your critical infrastructure and all of the things where we live and where we work in under what's going to be vulnerable, start to investigate options, and then start to really evaluate the risks versus the consequences and cost and benefit. And then we figure out how much we're willing to put forth in terms of real dollars to make the difference and to start to take action. Thank you for having me, and hope this wasn't too sciencey for you guys.